It was raining inside the station again. Not real rain, the kind they piped through the upper atmospheric filters to make the hydroponics feel less artificial. Fine mist drifted down through the transparent dome ceiling of Docide Promenade 6, catching in neon lights and turning the whole corridor into a shimmering blur of color. Most species hated it. Humans didn't mind. Daniel Reeves wiped condensation off his jacket sleeve as he stepped through the cafe sliding doors, boots tracking faint droplets across polished alloy flooring. The place was packed. Trade convoys had just docked, which meant merchants, contract officers, mechanics, and half a dozen military detachments were rotating through the station. Every table was filled, every booth taken. Conversations overlapped in a dozen languages, punctuated by the hiss of steam wands and the low hum of station ventilation. Daniel scanned the room. No chance. He'd just finished a 14-hour shift repairing gravitic stabilizers on a bulk hauler that should have been scrapped 3 systems ago. All he wanted was caffeine strong enough to file paperwork against reality. He took a step further inside. That's when he saw it. One table, one empty chair across from the largest being in the room. The alien sat alone at a reinforced circular table near the viewport. Its body was coiled tightly, scaled hide, catching the cafe lights in deep sapphire and charcoal tones. Horns curved back elegantly from its skull. Folded wings rested compact against its spine. Even seated, it towered over most patrons. A dragon, or close enough. Technically, the species registry called them Varelian draconids, Class V gravitic adaptive apex organisms. Technically, practically dragon. No one else sat near it. Tables within 3 meters were conspicuously vacant despite the crowd. Conversations quieted subtly around it. Glances flicked over, then away. Not fear exactly, but awareness. The kind of awareness that said that being is important. Daniel shifted his weight. He could leave. Try another cafe 2 levels down. Oh, he looked at the empty chair again. He walked over. The dragon's golden eyes lifted as he approached. They were sharp eyes, intelligent, old. Daniel gestured to the chair. Seat taken. The dragon stuttered him for a heartbeat, longer than socially comfortable. Then its head tilted slightly. No, it said. Its voice was deep but controlled, each syllable resonating faintly in Daniel's chest rather than just his ears. Daniel nodded once and pulled the chair out. Appreciate it. He dropped into the seat like someone who had absolutely no idea he might be doing something socially catastrophic. A few patrons outright stared now. The barista, a 6-limbed Kethy, froze mid-paw. Daniel didn't notice. He glanced at the menu holo hovering above the table and winced at the prices. Inflation's getting ridiculous, he muttered. The dragon's eyes narrowed slightly. Inflation? Yeah. Coffee shouldn't cost as much as a replacement air filter. The dragon blinked slowly. I was under the impression humans valued coffee highly. Daniel snorted softly. We do. Doesn't mean we want to mortgage our ships for it. The dragon's lips twitched. It might have been amusement. Daniel stood again. You want anything? He asked casually. Several heads snapped toward him. The dragon's gaze sharpened. You are offering. Yeah, I'm already here. A pause. Black, the dragon replied. Same. Daniel headed to the counter. Whispers broke out almost immediately behind him. Does he know? That's a Velion. Is he insane? The barista leaned forward nervously as Daniel paid. You are aware of your companion's stature? She asked carefully. Daniel shrugged. He looks tired. The barista hesitated. Very well. Daniel returned with 2 reinforced cups, setting one carefully in front of the dragon. Steam curled upward between them. The dragon stared at the cup as if it were an unfamiliar ritual object. It is customary, the dragon said slowly, to wait for others to initiate exchange. Daniel leaned back. Yeah, well, humans are bad at waiting. A long silence stretched. The rain outside intensified against the dome, streaking the viewport behind the dragon with silver lines. Daniel took a sip and winced. Still overpriced, he muttered. The dragon studied him. You do not appear intimidated. Daniel shrugged again. Should I be? The dragon didn't answer directly. Instead, it asked, Why would you sit here? Daniel glanced around at the crowded cafe. Only empty seat. The dragon's gaze flicked to the untouched buffer zone around the table. That is rarely the case. Daniel followed its look and finally noticed the conspicuous distance between their table and the others. He blinked. Oh, a beat. Well, guess people are missing out. The dragon's eyes glowed faintly brighter. On what? Daniel lifted his cup slightly. Company. Silence again, this time heavier. You assume I desire it, the dragon said. Daniel shrugged. You're in a café. Another pause. The dragon looked down at the coffee. Steam reflected in its eyes like distant stars. I was advised, it said slowly, that observing civilian life provides perspective. Daniel chuckled. Whoever told you that's not wrong? And you? The dragon asked. What about me? Why are you here? Daniel leaned back, stretching sore shoulders. Graves' stabilizer job went sideways. Spent half the day upside down in a maintenance crawl space. I'm here because if I go back to my bunk without caffeine, I'll question my career choices. The dragon's head tilted slightly. You repair ships? Yeah, warships. Anything that pays. A faint flicker passed through the dragon's eyes at that. Does it trouble you? It asked that your labor sustains conflict. Daniel considered that then shrugged. Conflict's going to happen with or without my wrench. I just tried to make sure the engines don't explode on the wrong people. The dragon absorbed that quietly. Outside the viewport, distant specks appeared in orbit. Small at first, then multiplying. Black silhouette slipping out of warp. Daniel didn't notice. The dragon did. Its pupils narrowed imperceptibly. You assist strangers frequently? It asked. Daniel smiled faintly. Depends. You buying next round? The dragon's lips twitched again. Why did you offer? It asked. Daniel shrugged for what felt like the 10th time. You looked like you needed it. The rain shimmered against the dome. Outside, the black warships began arranging themselves in perfect formation over the station. Inside the café, several patrons turned pale as orbital alerts flashed across their wrist displays. The barista froze again. Armored figures appeared at the café entrance. Daniel kept talking. So, what do you do? He asked casually. Besides looking dramatic near windows, the dragon looked at him for a long, thoughtful moment. I govern, it said quietly. Daniel blinked like apartment complex. The dragon's eyes gleamed faintly. Before it could answer, the cafe door slid open. An armored Imperial guard stepped inside. The armored figures didn't rush in. They flowed. Black and gold composite armor, crests edged into their pauldrons, helmets shaped to accommodate elongated muzzles and horns, Varillian design, Imperial guard, real ones, not station security. The cafe went silent in the way only civilian spaces can, cups halfway to lips, chair scraping softly. Breath held. Daniel glanced over his shoulder. Ah, he said mildly, you expecting friends? The dragon didn't look away from him. No. The guards fanned out with professional precision, forming a perimeter near the entrance, but not advancing toward the table. They weren't aiming weapons. They were waiting. The barista's hands trembled as she slowly lowered a cup onto the counter. Daniel looked between the guards and his companion. You sure? He asked quietly. The dragon took its first sip of coffee. Steam curled against its scaled muzzle. Quite sure. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Okay, because usually when people in matching armor show up, it means somebody didn't pay docking fees. One of the guards' helmets turned slightly toward him. The dragon's eyes gleamed faintly. You are unconcerned. Daniel shrugged. They don't look like they're here for me. That is a dangerous assumption. Daniel gestured to himself. I'm a freelance mechanic with overdue station taxes and a dented cargo hauler. I promise you I'm not worth a squad. A faint ripple passed through the guard's formation. Was that amusement? Hard to tell under helmets. The dragon studied Daniel carefully now. You perceive status through force projection, it said slowly. Armor, formation, presence. Sure, Daniel replied. Basic survival skill. And yet you did not apply it to me. Daniel blinked. You weren't standing in my way. A pause. That is your metric, pretty much. The dragon leaned back slightly in its reinforced chair, massive wings shifting subtly. You are aware my species has conquered entire sectors. Daniel took another sip of coffee. Yeah, I think I read that on a freight dog warning placard once, and that does not alarm you. Daniel tilted his head. You conquer them recently? The dragon's eyes narrowed slightly. No, then I'm good. A soft metallic click echoed as one of the guards adjusted stance. The dragon's tail coiled tight to beneath the table. You judge threat by immediacy, it said. Pretty much, Daniel replied. You going to torch the cafe? No. Then we're fine. The dragon's gaze lingered on him. You simplify complexity? Daniel grinned faintly. Comes with working around reactors. Overthink it, you miss the obvious problem. The dragon's claws flexed lightly around its cup. You would not behave differently if you knew who I was. Daniel considered that. If you're about to tell me you're some big-shot corporate magnate, I'm still not paying extra for the coffee. A faint vibration passed through the table. Subtle but deliberate. Outside the viewport, more black warships slid into orbit. Their formation tightened with mathematical precision. Patrons near the window began whispering urgently, checking personal devices. Daniel finally noticed the change in atmosphere. Okay, he said slowly, glancing around. So maybe they are here for you. The dragon's voice lowered slightly. Yes. Daniel blinked once. Well, that's inconvenient. The dragon tilted its head. You are not afraid. Daniel leaned back again, studying the dragon more carefully now. Should I be? A long pause. The guards remained motionless. The cafe's ambient noise had vanished completely. The dragon's golden eyes reflected the rain-slicked dome and the flicker of distant ships. I am not accustomed to conversation without agenda, it said. Daniel shrugged. I don't have one. That is statistically unlikely. Daniel chuckled softly. Look, man. He paused, reconsidering the word. Sorry. Look, friend, I don't know who you are. I saw an empty seat. That's it. The dragon's eyes sharpened slightly at the word friend. Daniel winced. Too much. No, the dragon replied slowly. Unusual. Another silence settled between them. Then the dragon asked quietly, why do humans offer assistance to strangers? Daniel blinked. That's a big question for a Tuesday night. Answer. Daniel stared into his coffee for a moment. Steam rose in thin spirals. My mom used to say, he began slowly, that you never know what someone's carrying. Could be the worst day of their life. Could be the best. Costs nothing to not make it worse. The dragon listened without interruption. So you assume I was carrying something? It asked. Daniel glanced up. You're sitting alone in a crowded cafe during artificial rain, staring at nothing. The dragon's claws tightened slightly around the cup. That is observant occupational hazard. You learn to notice when machinery is off balance, and you perceived imbalance. Daniel shrugged. You looked lonely. The word lingered in the air. Several guards shifted subtly. The dragon's pupils narrowed. You presume much, Daniel said gently. Sometimes you don't need to know details. The dragon studied him as though evaluating a new species entirely. You have suffered loss, it said suddenly. Daniel stiffened slightly. Yeah, he said after a moment. Most people have, and yet you choose openness. Daniel smiled faintly. Alternatives exhausting. The dragon leaned back further in its chair. Outside, a priority orbital signal pulsed across the station. Red station-wide notification tones began chiming softly in the background. The cafe owner nearly dropped a tray. Daniel sighed. Okay, he muttered. Now I'm thinking this might escalate. The dragon's eyes flicked toward the entrance. The guards straightened in perfect unison. One step forward, then stopped. The dragon didn't move. Instead, it asked quietly, if you discovered that I commanded those vessels, it nodded slightly toward the viewport, would you retract your offer? Daniel glanced at the ships, then back at the dragon. He took another sip. Coffee's already paid for, he said. A subtle tremor passed through the guard's formation. The dragon held his gaze. You do not recalibrate based on hierarchy. Daniel shrugged again. I calibrate based on behavior. A pause. The dragon exhaled slowly. The cafe doors slid fully open. This time, the guards did not simply stand. They stepped inside and dropped to one knee, helmets bowed, heads lowered. The entire cafe froze as one voice rang out clearly. Your Majesty, the perimeter is secured. Daniel blinked, looked at the kneeling guards, looked back at the dragon, then slowly lowered his cup. "Hey," he said quietly, and for the first time that evening, he recalibrated. For a full 3 seconds, Daniel assumed he'd misheard. "Your Majesty." The words echoed softly against the cafe's curved ceiling. No one moved. No one breathed. The guards remained kneeling perfectly still. Heads bowed in synchronized deference. Daniel looked at them, then at the dragon, then back at the guards. "That seems excessive," he said finally. A few patrons gasped at the casual tone. The dragon, no, the emperor, exhaled slowly through his nostrils. The steam from the coffee curled around his horns like coiling fog. "I apologize for the interruption," he said evenly. Daniel blinked. "You're not denying it." "I am not." The emperor's golden eyes held his calmly. "I govern this empire." Daniel stared for another heartbeat. Then he picked up his coffee and took a sip. "Okay." The word hung in the air like a dropped tool. Several guards twitched. One of them raised his head slightly, as if unsure whether this was some elaborate test. The emperor studied Daniel carefully. "You are not reacting as anticipated." Daniel lowered the cup. "What's the anticipated reaction?" "Panic, deference, strategic recalibration." Daniel squinted slightly. "Strategic what?" "Adjusting behavior to secure advantage." Daniel let out a small breath through his nose. "Oh, that." He leaned back in his chair. "Look, if you're emperor of something, congratulations. I still bought the coffee because you looked like you needed it." The guards shifted again, subtle but tense. The emperor's claws tightened imperceptibly around his cup. "Do you comprehend the scope of what you are saying?" the emperor asked quietly. Daniel shrugged. "I comprehend that this cafe is about to triple its prices tomorrow." A strangled sound escaped someone at the counter. The emperor's gaze flicked toward the gods. "Stand," he commanded. Instantly, they rose to full height, but none approached, none aimed weapons. They simply remained on alert. The emperor turned his attention back to Daniel. "Why did you not inquire into my identity?" he asked. Daniel scratched his chin. "Because I didn't care. Silence, not hostile, just stunned." The emperor leaned forward slightly. "You sit across from the ruler of nearly 300 inhabited systems." Daniel winced. "Okay, when you say it like that, it sounds bigger." "It is bigger." "Yeah, but you were still sitting alone." That landed. The emperor's tail shifted once beneath the table. "You equate solitude with vulnerability," he said. "Sometimes it is," Daniel replied softly. The emperor's gaze sharpened, "and sometimes it is strategic positioning." Daniel smiled faintly. "Sure, but that wasn't what this looked like." The rain against the dome intensified briefly, streaking the viewport in silver threads. Beyond it, the black warships held perfectly stable orbit. The emperor studied Daniel in a way that felt less like observation and more like dissection. "For centuries," the emperor said slowly, "every being who has approached me has done so with intent." Daniel lifted an eyebrow. "Intent's not always bad." "No," the emperor absent. "And mine?" Daniel asked. The emperor paused. "Absent?" Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Look, I fix engines. I don't negotiate treaties. I don't overthrow regimes. I saw someone alone. That's it." One of the guards stepped closer instinctively. The emperor lifted a claw slightly without looking. The guard froze. "You are aware," the emperor continued quietly, "that a single word from me could alter your life permanently." Daniel stared at him. "In a good way or a bad way?" The emperor's eyes narrowed faintly. "That depends." Daniel considered that, then shrugged again. "Then let's not test it." A few patrons actually gasped. The emperor tilted his head. "You decline imperial favor?" Daniel gestured vaguely with his cup. "I decline complications." The emperor leaned back slowly. "Most beings would exploit this moment." Daniel snorted softly. "To what? Get a better docking slot." The emperor's lips twitched faintly. "You are either fearless or foolish, probably both," Daniel admitted. Silence stretched between them again, but this time it felt different, less tense, more curious. The emperor glanced down at the coffee cup. "You purchased this without knowing my station." "Yep. And you would have done so regardless." "Yep." The emperor's eyes glowed faintly brighter. "Why?" The single word carried more weight than the earlier title. Daniel thought about it, not flippantly this time. He looked at the guards, at the frozen patrons, at the rain, then back at the Emperor. "Because you looked like you needed someone to talk to," he said quietly. The Emperor held his gaze. No sarcasm, no fear, no calculation, just honesty. Outside, the warship shifted slightly in orbit, as if responding to an unseen command. The cafe owner gripped the counter. Daniel sighed. "Also," he added, "please don't conquer the station. I like this place." The Emperor blinked. "You are negotiating on behalf of the cafe. Someone should." For a long moment, the Emperor said nothing. Then a low sound rumbled from deep within his chest. Not anger, not threat, laughter. It rolled across the cafe like distant thunder, warm, resonant, unmistakably real. Several guards looked up in shock. The Emperor hadn't laughed publicly in years. Daniel blinked. "Was that a good sign?" "Yes," the Emperor replied. His voice had changed slightly. Lighter. "Your Majesty," one of the guards said carefully. "Orbital Commander waits directive." The Emperor did not look away from Daniel. "Stand down," he said calmly. The guard stiffened, full withdrawal from visible formation. The Emperor continued. "Maintain discreet overwatch. Only a beat." "Yes, Your Majesty." The guard tapped his wrist console. Outside the viewport, the black warships began to disperse from their intimidating pattern into standard civilian traffic positions. The red orbital alerts faded. Murmurs spread through the cafe. The Emperor turned back to Daniel. "You requested that I not conquer this place." Daniel nodded slowly. "Yeah, your request is granted." Daniel blinked. That was easy. The Emperor's golden eyes softened slightly. "It was never under consideration," he said. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Good, because I really don't want to find a new coffee place." The Emperor regarded him with something approaching admiration. "For the first time in decades," the Emperor said quietly, "I have been spoken to without expectation." Daniel shrugged one last time. "Yeah, that sounds exhausting." The Emperor stuttered him carefully. "Daniel Reeves," he said. Daniel froze. "Okay, now that's unsettling." The Emperor's eyes gleamed faintly. "I govern, right?" Daniel exhaled slowly. "Fair." The Emperor leaned back once more. "Tell me," he said calmly, "if I were to return here without guards, without fleet, would you share another coffee?" Daniel looked at him. Really, looked, not at the scales, not at the crown of implied authority. At the being, "Yeah," Daniel said, seat still open. The Emperor nodded once. And for the first time in centuries, he was not alone in a crowded room. The cafe never fully recovered its original noise level. Conversations resumed in careful fragments. Cups clinked softly. Someone nervously laughed and immediately stopped. Outside the viewport, the last of the black warships slipped from visible intimidation pattern into civilian orbit lanes. Station alerts faded from red to neutral, but no one left. No one wanted to miss what happened next. The Emperor's guards stepped back toward the entrance, no longer forming a barrier around the table. Their posture shifted from perimeter lockdown to quiet vigilance. Daniel glanced around. "So," he said mildly, "does this mean my coffee shop has diplomatic immunity now?" A few patrons blinked. The Emperor's eyes gleamed faintly. "You prioritize this establishment's safety over your own." Daniel shrugged. "I can survive a lot of things." Losing decent coffee would hurt. The Emperor regarded him thoughtfully. "You are aware that if word spreads of this interaction, your status will change." Daniel grimaced. "Please don't make me important." The Emperor tilted his head. "Most beings strive for importance." "Yeah," Daniel replied. "Most beings don't know what it costs." That earned another long pause. The Emperor leaned back in the reinforced chair, wings shifting slightly as he adjusted his weight. "You assume my position is costly." Daniel met his gaze evenly. "I assume anything that requires fleets is." The rain against the dome softened into a steady whisper. The Emperor's golden eyes flicked briefly toward the ceiling, as if tracking something distant. "Orbital command confirmations." "Probably you asked why I was alone," the Emperor said quietly. Daniel nodded. You were observing civilian life, he replied. That's what you said, yes. And the emperor's claws traced lightly along the rim of the coffee cup. For centuries, I have governed through projection, he said. Power, certainty, inevitability. Daniel listened without interruption. No one approaches me without calculation. The emperor continued. Even my closest advisors measure each word against potential consequence. Daniel winced slightly. Sounds lonely. The emperor did not deny it. You offered companionship without advantage. Daniel shrugged. I offered caffeine. Do not diminish your action. The words carried unexpected weight. Daniel shifted in his chair, suddenly uncomfortable. Look, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. I didn't know who you were. That's the whole point. And now that you do, Daniel looked at him. You still looked like you needed someone to talk to. The emperor's pupils narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in focus. Why? The question came again, deeper this time. Daniel considered it carefully because now it mattered. He looked at the guards, at the frozen cafe owner, at the patrons, pretending not to stare. Then back at the emperor because someone did it for me once, he said quietly. The emperor waited. My mom, Daniel, continued after my dad died. She had no reason to help half the people she did, but she said if you only show up when it benefits you, you're not really showing up. Silence settled between them. The emperor's wings shifted almost imperceptibly. You do not seek compensation. No, you do not seek status. No, you do not seek protection. Daniel snorted softly. I'd rather not be in situations where I need imperial protection. A faint rumble of amusement escaped the emperor again. Your honesty borders on reckless. Probably. The emperor leaned forward slightly. If I were to grant you favor, he said carefully, it would be irrevocable. Daniel stiffened. Define favor, elevated trade clearance, financial exemption, personal security. Daniel shook his head immediately. No. The guards exchanged subtle glances. The cafe owner nearly fainted. The emperor's gaze sharpened. You decline imperial privilege. I decline strings, Daniel corrected. The emperor studied him for a long moment. You fear obligation. I respect it, Daniel replied. Big difference. Outside, station traffic resumed its normal pattern. The artificial rain shifted to a softer mist. The emperor leaned back again. Something thoughtful in his expression. Then allow me to adjust the environment rather than the individual. Daniel blinked. What does that mean? The emperor's claws tapped lightly against the table. Docide Promenade 6 will receive infrastructure reinforcement funding. The cafe owner gasped audibly. Security patrols will increase, the emperor continued. Trade tariffs for this sector will be reduced by 2%. Daniel stared at him. That's not subtle. It is not tied to you, the emperor said calmly. It is tied to data indicating this district underperforms relative to potential. Daniel narrowed his eyes. You're doing it anyway. I am governing, the emperor replied. A long pause. Daniel exhaled slowly. Okay, that's less uncomfortable. The emperor's eyes softened slightly. You asked that I not conquer this station. I did. I will not. Daniel nodded once, appreciated. Another quiet moment passed. Then the emperor asked something softer. Do humans always extend kindness without assurance of safety? Daniel considered that. No, he admitted. We mess it up a lot, but we try. The emperor's tail uncoiled slightly beneath the table. That effort may explain your species' resilience. Daniel chuckled faintly. Pretty sure stubbornness explains that. Perhaps both. The guards shifted subtly again as a private channel pinged through their armor. Your Majesty, one said carefully. The council awaits. The emperor did not look away from Daniel. They will continue to await, he replied calmly. The guard bowed his head. Daniel stared. You're blowing off a Galactic council meeting for coffee. The emperor's eyes glowed faintly. Yes. Daniel shook his head slowly. That's wild. The emperor's voice lowered slightly. For the first time in many cycles, I am not being addressed as a symbol. He paused. You addressed me as a person. Daniel met his gaze. Yeah, you're still that silence again. But this time it felt lighter, less charged. The emperor finished his coffee. He set the empty cup down carefully. I will return, he said. Daniel blinked. You don't need an appointment. I do not request one. Daniel smiled faintly. Good. The emperor rose slowly from the reinforced chair. Even standing, he did not loom. He simply occupied space with quiet certainty. The guard stepped aside. The café remained frozen. At the door, the emperor paused. He looked back once. Daniel Reeves. Daniel winced again, still unsettling. The emperor's eyes gleamed faintly. You altered nothing, he said. Then why does it feel different? Daniel asked. The emperor considered that. Because you spoke to power without seeking it. He stepped through the doors. The guards followed. Outside, the rain softened to a faint shimmer. The black warships held distant, respectful orbit, and inside the café, the seat across from Daniel remained open. The café tripled its sales within a week. It didn't advertise. It didn't need to. Word traveled the way it always did across the galaxy through duckworkers, traders, low-tier officials, station gossip threads, and eventually official channels that pretended not to reference rumor. Docide Promenade 6 was now listed in imperial economic bulletins as a priority trade stabilization district. Taxes adjusted. Freight congestion decreased. Security patrols became noticeably more professional. No banners declared why. No monuments were built, but the station felt steadier. Daniel tried very hard to ignore it. He went back to work the next morning like nothing had happened. He crawled through maintenance ducts. He argued with a stubborn coolant regulator. He nearly electrocuted himself on a miswired junction. Normal, but people weren't. The first sign was the docking clerk, who suddenly addressed him as Sir. The second was the station manager, who waived his berth fees without explanation. The third was the quiet stares, not mocking, not hostile, assessing. Daniel finally cornered the café owner on his third visit that week. Did you tell anyone? He asked. The owner wrung her upper hands nervously. I told no one. I swear the security footage. It was requisitioned. Bye. She swallowed. Imperial Archive. Daniel groaned softly. Of course it was. She leaned closer. You truly did not know. No. And you still? Yeah. She shook her head slowly in disbelief. You refused elevation. I refused complication. The owner stared at him for a moment, then smiled faintly. You may be the strangest human I have ever met. Low bar, Daniel muttered. Outside, station traffic moved with unusual smoothness. No pirate probes, no territorial skirmishes in adjacent sectors. Even the news feeds felt quieter. 2 weeks later, an unmarked shuttle slipped into Dock 7 without fanfare. No fleet, no intimidation formation, just one sleek, dark vessel. Daniel saw it from a distance inside, of course. The café doors chimed softly that evening. Rain filtered gently through the dome again. The Emperor entered alone. No guards, no armor columns, no orbital alerts. Patrons glanced up and then surprisingly went back to their drinks. Word had spread, yes, but so had instruction. The Emperor approached the table near the viewport. The same one Daniel was already there. He lifted a cup in greeting. Seat still open. The Emperor inclined his head and took it. You anticipated my return, he said. Daniel shrugged. You said you would. You believed me. Seemed simpler. The Emperor studied him for a moment. You are not curious about what has changed. Daniel glanced around the café. I noticed, yet you did not inquire. Figured if you wanted to tell me, you would. A faint flicker of amusement passed through the Emperor's eyes. I reduced tariffs in this sector. I heard. I reassigned 3 corrupt trade administrators. Daniel blinked. Okay, that one I didn't hear. You were not meant to. Daniel leaned back slightly. See, that's the problem. What problem? You're doing things because you can. The Emperor's gaze sharpened. I govern. Yeah, Daniel replied calmly. But are you doing them because they are right or because you felt something? The Emperor paused. That question had not been asked in centuries. Does the distinction matter? He asked quietly. Daniel considered that. Yeah. Silence lingered. The Emperor folded his claws lightly on the table. I did not alter policy because of you, he said carefully. Good. I altered policy because your perspective revealed inefficiencies in my oversight. Daniel squinted. That sounds suspiciously like growth. The Emperor's lips twitched faintly. Perhaps steam rose from their fresh cups. No one in the cafe bowed, no one panicked. The emperor was simply there. "Do you know," the emperor said quietly, "that several planetary governors have requested audience with you?" Daniel nearly choked on his coffee. "Absolutely not. You would decline. I fix engines. You could influence systems." Daniel shook his head. "I influenced you. That's enough?" The emperor studied him carefully. "You underestimate your impact." Daniel met his gaze evenly. "And you overestimate your distance." A long pause. The emperor's eyes softened slightly. "For the first time in my reign," he said, "I am aware of how much distance I have cultivated." Daniel nodded once. "Comes with the job, I guess, does it?" Daniel leaned forward slightly. "Power isolates if you let it." The emperor looked toward the rain-slicked viewport. "And if I do not, then you show up sometimes without a fleet." The emperor's tail shifted subtly beneath the table. "That is inefficient." "Yeah," Daniel said with a small smile, "but it's human." Another rumble of soft laughter rolled through the emperor's chest. Patrons glanced up, but no one panicked. The cafe owner simply refilled their cups. "Daniel Reeves," the emperor said after a moment. "Still unsettling." "You altered nothing," the emperor repeated. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Then why are you here again?" The emperor held his gaze. "Because for 1 hour in this place, I am not a symbol." Daniel nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's called being a person." Silence fell again, but this time it was comfortable. Outside, the station thrived under quiet adjustments. No proclamations tied them to this table. No monuments credited Daniel. No titles were bestowed. The emperor finished his coffee and stood. "Until next cycle," he said. Daniel lifted his cup. "Don't conquer anything on the way out." The emperor's eyes gleamed. "I make no promises." He stepped toward the exit. At the door, he paused briefly. Without turning back, he said, "The galaxy bows to power." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Yeah," the emperor's voice carried softly through the cafe. "You offered it a seat." The doors slid shut behind him, and Daniel went back to his